Well, folks, old Buster coming to you again. This old story's in a pickle. And I'm hoping y'all are having a blessed day. You know, I pretty much sign that out when I'm reading stories and quitting for the evening, but I hope you really do. This new year we're having coming up, and just hope everything comes out for this world and the United States of America and everybody in it. Well, Jesse and Walter seed Buster and hired off and was a lamenting why they couldn't go along with them. Well, hired was a flying the queen. You know, they done got that queen, you know. Buster got it from old neighbor over there, old Red. He got that from him there. And hired was a flying the queen that day because he was a looking farmers to flying over the ocean. Wasn't but 52 miles across to the island from Florida, but it was just a notion, I reckon. Well, Walter told Jesse that them two was going to have way too much fun or get theirselves in a pickle for sure. Just wasn't right them a taking off without him. Well, Jesse said to Walter that his lawyering test there at the University of Alabama was going to be coming this week, and Walter had to see to his hogs and pipelining business. Him and Lou Ann was looking to marry up too, and she had some things for him to do. They was both just too busy this coming week to get a loose to go with Buster and Hired. Well now, Hired knowed the feller and got to be friends with him over on the Grand Bahama Island by the name of Louis Chang. Now Buster met the feller whilst he was scuba diving with the sharks. Now old Louis started that business over there a good while back, and that was when you didn't wear none of them chainmail suits neither. Well, you know, him and old Louis, they grabbed them sharks and they just rubbed their old heads and put them to sleep and everything, but the one thing about it though, you had to rub with the grain, not against it. It's just like the worst sandpaper you ever got a hold of. Well, Louis had been a-diving for quite a spell, though, you know, and the fact was that was how he come to get his start on his way to be a millionaire. That and him marrying up with Maisie. Her and her people owned half of downtown Freeport, Grand Bahama Island, and knowed all the politicians and movers and shakers in that part of the world. When Louis got to where he was old enough to strike out on his own, he had to figure a way to make extra money. The jewelry people that come from different parts of the world wanted the black coral and paid dearly for it. Now, Louis didn't have no fancy diving gear, so he just went out on a borrowed boat, tied a concrete block to a rope and to him, and jumped overboard. Well, when Louis got down deep enough to the wall to where the black coral was, he'd cut the rope and let the concrete block fall to the bottom whilst he hung on to the wall. Then Louis would break off all that black coral, then he would hate on for the surface. Well, when Louis got up there, he'd sell the black coral, and then he took the money from selling it and invested it in other ventures for more profit. You ought to see all the watches Louis has invested in his collection. Ain't no telling what they is worth. Had them fancy kinds from over in Switzerland. On old Buster's last trip over to dive, Louis got to talking about what all Buster was telling him about mining and selling rock. You see, Hired's pa used lots of rock of making road beds in his construction business. And Hired learned about the need of lots of rock down on the coast. Seemed like because of the nature of the rock, the specs, that's called the specification kinds of the rocks, weren't quite as strict from the government, plus there weren't much rock to be had down there. Well, Louis said they could get all the rock they wanted from where the port harbor was dredged. He knowed the feller who run the harbor and could get 'em a permit to mine it. Well, Hired and Buster was going over to check it all out and such to see if they could make some money doing their thing with getting that rock out. And it'd all be for the boys as well as give some jobs to the local folks there and old Louis. Now, even though Louis was Chinese, he was a devout Catholic and had the support of the priest in helping the local folk. Well, Louis figured he had all the bases covered, and it was sure enough a heck of a deal for everybody. When I Hired landed at the airport, and whilst he was about to taxi to tie up, two of the commercial jets was passing by each other when one of them got too close and hit the wing of the other with his wing. That really did put a twitch in doings there, I tell you. Well, finally Hired got to the parking spot, and Buster and him got on out, met up with Louis after going through the custom. Well, Louis took him to the hotel to check in and then to his house for dumplings, because he done knew Buster loved them dumplings he cooked, and he'd cook up a mess of them for him every time he come. You see, Louis did know Buster dearly, and he dearly loved dumplings, and he made them for Buster every time he come over. They had a nice early supper with Maisie and then commenced to figure on what to do the next day. Well, Louis said he made arrangements to get him the permit to mine, but it cost him a pair of Mercury outboard motors for the feller's boat as a way of appreciation. Now, the feller didn't ask for the motors, but Louis knowed the feller needed them and couldn't afford them right then. Just good business, he said. Well, after visiting for a spell, Louis took Buster and hired out to where all the material was piled up, all that rock, you know. Lordy mercy, it was piled 4 stories high from can to cant. Well, Buster and Hired done figured they done found a bird nesters on the ground, and all they needed was to get a screen and a small portable crusher into the closest place to the road for hauling. Well, after looking over the area and walking it over to find the best place they figured to start operations, Louis took the boys over to the casino where he knowed the owner. Louis said this here feller was a kind of the head knocker of the port. You see, the port was privately owned and the government didn't have no say in the port's business. Now, Buster and Hired was introduced to Mr. Edward St. Martin, the chairman of the Grand Bahama Port Authority. He was the dangest feller a body would want to meet now. The head knocker. He was turned to be just a real good feller, though. Come to find out, Mr. Edward knowed some of Buster's people from England. He told Buster he was from real good stock and ought to go over and meet his and kin. Well, to say the least, their meeting went better than expected. Louis didn't have no idea that Buster's people was knowed by Mr. Edward. Appeared they had a friend in high places on the island, and they was eager to get on setting up their business. Now, Mr. Edward told the boys to come on by his office and they'd work out the details tomorrow. Now, old Louis was fit to be tied, I tell you. He was happier than a pig in slop. His brother-in-law was in politics with the current Prime Minister of the Bahamas, and he figured to have a little pull, but this takes the cake for sure, he said. Now, he told Buster the next day that he done a little checking with his friends, and the Tiptons was a big deal over in England. Louis said they'd been royalty since the 1200s. Well, Buster said he didn't know too much about all that, because he was pretty near raised by his grandma and grandpa Gus there in England, Arkansas, not England. But he did learn something about all that, and Jesse to boot from his great aunt not too long ago in Kentucky. Anyways, he said they ought to be on the right track now, and was glad his name stood for something, and they just needed to get on with the making of rock and the selling it. Well, the next few days was the setting up, getting the right equipment and the permit, and contracting with a tug and barge operation to get the rock to the coast of Florida, Georgia, Alabama, and Texas. Them Texicans needed bad too. Things was coming together right nicely when there was a squawk from Western States Mining. They was having a hissy fit because the boys' outfit got first dibs on the rock when Western States Mining figured they was the only game in town and figured they had a lock on all the rock sales on the island and to the other ports. Now, Louis, being a Bahamian citizen and all, give him first rights, and they couldn't do nothing about it. Well, Louis took Buster and Hired to the local concrete company where he had some contacts for them to meet. Well, when they all got there, Louis introduced the boys to a loader operator that was going to work for him. You see, locals had to be hired for the work to be done, but foreigners would come into the country as supervisors on a special permit. Well, anyhow, Buster and Hired watched the feller operate the loader up against the high wall, and they told Louis there was going to be trouble if he didn't pull back. The wall was going to cave in on the feller if he didn't watch out. Well, sure enough, the wall broke off and fell on the loader, covering up the cab of the loader with the feller in it. The feller was dang lucky he didn't get killed or hurt. Well, when he was pulled out from the rock and dirt, he just sputtered a bit and went on back to doing just what he was doing and not paying no never mind to the wall caving in again. Plumb pitiful. No safety at all at that place, said Buster to Hired and Louis. Well, the boys the next took to the port to look at where the port wanted them to start moving the rock. It was also closer to the barges and easier loading. Whilst they was there, ambulances come a-roaring in. There was a feller asleep under a tarp when another feller come by on a forklift with his and forks raised too high and run one of 'em plumb through. The feller skewered him like you'd dadgum would a piece of fish. Stopped him something awful, plumb awful. Well, Jesse wasn't no just wasn't no. Let me get my. Yeah, I get tickled every time I think about it. That wasn't too funny, but some of these things going on now, you got to understand. Now I was there. It just wasn't no safety round about that place. If work was going to be done here, a good safety program sure would be needed, or they wouldn't have nobody to work. They'd all be hurt or killed. Or a body would be in a pickle for sure, taking his life in his own hands on this here job. Them folks was a driving, oh man, they was a sight too. They all seemed to drink right smart and speed like there was no tomorrow. Well, Louis explained that when you see the little tree or one of them missing in the median between the two lanes, it meant that there had been a wreck at that spot, and all 'cause of drinking and a driving. That whole dang place was like a war zone, said Hart. Well, the boys went to looking at dredges that was available there on the island and just how they was to blast in the water in the harbor and hauling cost and all that, you know. Them costs you had to figure it all up, see if you're going to make a profit. You see, the Port Authority was also wanting the boys to deepen the harbor and widen it too. That way they could get more rock and make a pretty penny for excavation. Well, now, Howard was all over that project, I tell you, and Buster knowed a thing or two about underwater demolition. The diving part wasn't going to be no problem, but a certified blaster wasn't going to be cheap. Seemed like a doable project and a heck of a challenge for the boys. Well, Louis said there was all kinds of opportunities on the island and elsewhere in the Bahamas. Well, Howard had a little experience with working in the islands because of when his and Paul had a job of paving roads over there on St. John's Island, and he went over to help him a while back. The boys know they would be making an investment for sure, and if they could just stick to moving the rock that had been dug out 20 or so years before, they could go on and make this a permanent business. Well, Howard and Buster figured with the folks available in the islands as well as some old boys that wanted to come on over to work, that they could put together a good crew with Louis's help, of course. This all had to be hashed out back at the house with Jesse and Walter, but it sure looked promising. Well, after spending 4 days on the island, Howard got himself a phone call to come on back to the house. His and Paul done broke his leg and needed Howard to get things going on a job they just had bid whilst he was laid up for a spell. Well, Howard said they had a good ramrod that could run things till his and Paul got back on his feet, but he needed to head on back for a couple days. Well, Buster said he'd stay on and continue to work on out the details and get more information whilst Howard took care of business, and then he could bring Jesse and Walter back with him. Well, seemed like a good plan, Howard said, and told Buster he would leave that afternoon and be back with the boys on Sunday. Well, Louis said he'd keep Buster busy and full of dumplings till they got back, and Buster was all for that, I'm here to tell you. Well, Howard checked out the motel, well, it's a hotel, I reckon, and at noon, and left on out for the house. Meanwhile, Buster made arrangements for Howard, Walter, and Jesse for an indefinite stay beginning Sunday night at the hotel. Well, after dinner with Louis and looking around a bit with him, Buster went on back to the room, seeing how it was getting towards evening like. Well, after Howard left and Buster was in the room they shared, Buster noticed something sticking out from under Howard's mattress. Well, housekeeping hadn't finished making up the bed, so the mattress didn't have no sheets nor covers on it. There was some plastic bags stuck up under Howard's mattress, 3 of them in fact, and every one of them had some kind of light tan, gooey stuff in it. One of them bags was just barely sticking out, and Buster seen it out the corner of his eye. Well, now, this sure was enough of a mystery, thought Buster. Buster knowed Howard ain't put nothing under his mattress, so it had to be from somebody that stayed there before, somebody that had access to their room. Housekeeping, maybe. Well, Buster wasn't no dummy by a long shot, and the first thing he thought of was poison or drugs. The islands was famous for 'em. So Buster calls down to the front desk and tells him to send somebody up to get the mess out and check it out. Well, Buster just had a natural curiosity and decided to open one of the bags and take a look in it. Woo-wee, that stuff smelled to high heaven, and pert near took Buster to his knees, I'm a-telling you. And that would have sure enough been a chore in itself. Well, Buster got sicker than a dog, and the feller come from hotel security got the room. Old Buster was green around the gills. Well, Buster was down to his drawers when the police come. Hotel security called them, and they come in with all kind of folk. There was even what they call a DEA feller from the States with them, and the Bahamian police too. Well, the police took Buster out the room and downstairs and left him sitting on a bench outside whilst they evacuated the hotel. Well, heck, fire, there was sure enough an uproar over that, I tell you. People was a-coming and a-going, and where Buster was sitting on the bench in his drawers, he felt like he didn't have no good sense. Well, the police told him to wait there, and the feller was assigned to stay with him. Well, after a bit, Buster was questioned, and he told them all he knowed about all of what happened. First off, the police thought it might be somebody wanting to blow up the place, and the next thing he thought of was drugs. Now, Buster was sicker than a dog by then. He said he needed to see a doctor and needed his pants. Well, one of the police brought him some clothes and his shoes, and then Buster was going to be carted off to the hospital to get looked at. Well, now, there was two good old boys by the name of Jeff Fox and Brett Black that Buster and Hired met up with while they'd been there at the hotel. They was from the States and was there on the island bidding on a job for the port. They was a-staying there at the hotel too for a spell. Fact was that Buster and Hired had been to eat with them two boys a couple of times with Louie. Well, now Jeff really wanted to get into the local flavor of the island and eat what they what them islanders ate and such. And Louie took them to a time I think of this, I get tickled. Louie took them all to a local place that was way out the way. Old Jeff had him some kind of fish soup for breakfast, and the fisherman ate one of them that day, and then one other time he had turtle for dinner. Now, you ain't never seen a mess like that there turtle. It was a green, gooey, slimy glob that looked something like burled okra, and it smelled to high heaven. Now, Jeff got him a good dose of that, and after about 3 spoonfuls, turned green as a gourd around the gills, I tell you. Well, he had about all he wanted of that turtle, and it was turning him every which way but loose. He was like a yeller old, don't get me tickled, like an old yeller dog commode hugging. On the way back, Jeff said he just had to stop for the gents, so Louie pulled into this bar he knowed up. Now, whilst Jeff was in the gents, Buster and Hired had ordered theirself a couple of drinks. They had 'em before, and they was right tasty, so whilst they was a-waiting for Jeff, they had one apiece. Now, Jeff didn't drink no alcohol, but after he come out of that there toilet, he downed a couple of what they called the Miami Vices that was on the table, thinking it was fruit juice. Lord, folks. They was the drinks that Buster and Hired had ordered. Now, Jeff said he would buy him another round, but he just had to have something to kill the taste of that turtle. Well, twixt that turtle and the alcohol, old Jeff got suckered than a commode hugging 2 for a penny yeller hound dog. And after he got back to the hotel, he stayed in the bed for 2 days. Well, about that time, Buster was putting on his pants. Jeff and Brent drove up in a little rented Suzuki car, they called it. Heck, the thing was smaller than a Volkswagen. The dang tires wasn't no bigger than a wheelbarrow tire. Well, Buster asked the fellers if they wouldn't carry him to the hospital. They said they surely would, and since they couldn't get in the hotel, they didn't have nothing else to do and be right glad to do it. I asked Buster what all went on. Well, Jeff and Brent drove Buster to the hospital, and Buster got looked at by the doctor and told him he was all right. The police come in, was waiting for Buster, and when he come out the examination room, told him not to leave the island. Buster was there till the investigation was over, they said. Didn't know how long that was going to take. Well, Buster excused himself to the gents and stuck his and Hade out the door and told Jeff and Brent to come around the back and pick him up. Well, they done just that, and Buster told Jeff to give her the gas and get on out of there and fast. Well, Buster told Jeff and Brent the whole story and said he had to get on back to the hotel and get his belongings and passport so he could get on back to the house. Well, Buster told him he sure enough appreciated him springing him from the hospital. It was a mighty fine escape. Well, whilst they was going back to the hotel, Jeff was pouring the coal of that little Suzuki car when he hit one heck of a pothole. He blowed 3 of the 4 tires on the thing, and what a pickle, Buster said they was in. Well, all of them got on out the car and was looking at it between the 3 of them when they see the feller coming down the road in an old Oldsmobile. Well, Buster waved him down and asked if he could give him a ride, and Buster offered to pay the feller. Now, the feller was an old Bahamian feller that didn't drive over 25 miles an hour, but he piled all of them in and got them there to the hotel. Well, Jeff got out and called the car company, and they about had a cow over all them blowed tires and leaving the car on the side of the road. Well, Jeff told them it weren't their fault. They didn't put the potholes in the road and to go get the car and fix the tires. Well, Buster went in the hotel and see the guard at his door. In a bit, whilst Buster was figuring on what to do, the guard left his post for coffee or something to eat, he didn't know. And Buster run up to the door and stuck in his key card to see if it would open. The door, that is. Well, lo and behold, it did. Buster was downright surprised, but right proud it did. In no time flat, Buster gathered up his passport first and his belongings next and give Louie a call and told him to pick him up out back at the hotel. Now, Louie was driving Maisie's 500 SEL Mercedes convertible red car when Louie got there. Now, Buster throwed his suitcase in the back seat and jumped in, and they took on off. Didn't even open the door. He just jumped over the door and the top was down. Well, Louie and Buster went to discussing what all was going to happen and what could be done about this here mess. Well, Louie stopped and made some calls and said he was told that Buster was going to be kept in the Bahamas till the investigation was over and wasn't no telling how long that was going to be. Well, Louie agreed with Buster that only a darn fool would be involved in drugs and call the police and give them to him. Just didn't make no sense. Louie said what the police was going to do was just to keep Buster there till court, if they caught somebody. The staff and previous occupants of the room would be interviewed and the police was going to track down who had the drugs. That was what it was, said Louie. It was some kind of heroin. Buster ain't never seen none of that before, but he sure knowed it would knock a feller for a loop. Who in the world would want something like that here in their body? Dangest mess he was ever in. What a pickle. Well, Louie finished up his phone call and said he had a plan. He asked if Buster had his passport, and Buster told Louie he did, and all his belongings too. Louie said he'd settle up at the hotel and call the police and let them know Buster was back in the States and going to go see his own doctor. That is, if they could get Buster back to Florida. Lord. Of course, you know, Buster's doctor was old Doc Harris. Well, Louie drove Buster to the airport, and Buster took up to a Bahamian woman Louie knowed that worked for the Continental Airlines. Well, heck fire, Buster was going to be smuggled out the country on the Continental Airlines. Well, Buster paid the woman what all she asked for, and she give him a ticket and told him to head on out to the plane. Buster didn't even have to go through customs. Well, Louie told Buster they would talk soon about everything, but to be sure and call him when he landed. Well, Buster said he would and thanked him for helping him on out. Well, Buster sure breathed a sigh of relief when they took off, and hour or so they was in the air, because one of the longest of his in life, he said, later on he told the boys. When Buster landed, he got a cab to a good hotel and called Louie and give him the number there. Louie said he'd call him back and not to leave till he did. Well, Buster didn't really know how long that'd be, so he began to call in the boys. Well, Buster rounded up Jesse first, and he got the other boys to hightail it over to his place in Pronto. Well, Jesse told Walter and Hired that Buster was in Palm Beach and they had to go get him right now. Now, Buster answered on the first ring, and it was Hired calling on his way to Jesse's place. He was wanting to know what all was going on, and Buster told Hired he done it to him again, left him there in a pickle. Well, Hired just laughed and said he'd be at Jesse's in about 20 minutes with all the other boys, and then they could hash it out then. Well, Buster ordered up something to eat, and he was about to cave in. he ain't had a bite since the day before at dinner time and was hungry as a bear. It was nigh on an hour till Jesse called back and asked Buster if he had heard from Louie. Buster said he hadn't and went over the whole shebang again in sordid detail with the boys. Well, Jesse said Howard was going to fly them down and they would be there before nightfall. Well, Howard said they would call when they refueled the Queen and catch up on any news. Buster said it ought to be in about 2 hours or so, he didn't think. Howard said, yep, that was about right. Well, all the boys got there before nightfall, as Howard said they would, and checked into the hotel and was just a-waiting for word from Louie. Well, nigh on to 9 o'clock, Louie called and told him what all was said to the police. They wasn't none too happy that Buster was gone, but Louie told them Buster would be available if they had any questions. But he went on back home to his own doctor, and he was ailing some. Well, the police finally good with that, as Louie and his friends vouched for Buster. Buster reckoned that Mr. Edward might have had a lot to do with that now. The next morning, before the boys left out for home, Louie called. Louie said if and they wanted to continue on with the project, everything would be all right, but give it a little time for the investigation to be completed. Louie would call them then. The boys discussed the project and what all could be done in the islands. All of them liked it down there and would like to help the folks as well as turn a profit. They all decided to do their homework on the deal and make a decision on it later on. Well, Howard was all for it, 100%. Walter said Howard sure had his mouth set for the deal and was good to go if and all of it continued to look good. Well, Jesse said he wasn't going to let none of them get into anything less than he was there, so there you have it. Time would tell. Just as they was landing, Buster said to Howard that every time they went summers, he was always the last to leave and something happened to him. Well, Howard just laughed and slapped old Buster on the back and said he was just a magnet for adventure. Well, Buster hollered, adventure ain't got nothing to do with it. You just like to see me get in a pickle. Well, them boys is always into something, you know. And Buster's got to try to get something loose from them. See if they couldn't get it all straightened out down there. Well, y'all have a blessed day. This is old Buster signing out to you.